think of that report?
Oh, hang on, Pete. Just before you reply, I've got to check with Jamie whether or not he has a conflict of interest here.
I don't.
Okay.
A lot of my friends are clinical pharmacologists, and
Okay, go ahead, Pete.
I think there was a couple of things that struck me about it. One was that we don't see in intensive care a lot of the top agents. So paracetamol overdoses, for example, actually rarely trouble us unless they're encephalopathic and need to come to us for that reason, or the transplant candidate. I can't remember the last time I saw a paracetamol overdose in intensive care. It was quite some time. What we do see is the pregabalins, the gabapentins, and the mirtazapines quite often make it to us. Usually because you can't. So, if someone's taking a benzo overdose, you can't I've never used flumazenil, for example, because if you reverse the benzo aspect of it, you've still got the other drugs causing an issue. So I've used doxapram more than I've used flumazenil in my career, which may tell you a bit about how old I am. But
yeah, definitely.
So. And then in terms of the illegal agents, I think cannabis was sort of second on their chart. And again, I don't really see the effects of cannabis all that much. And even the cocaine-induced sorts of MIs, again, very rarely do we see those sorts of things. We obviously see them when they've done an absolute job on themselves. So, for example, ethylene glycol, I've seen more ethylene glycol in ITU than I have cannabis. And that's a tough one to try and get right because obviously, number one, the blood test, I think, gets sent to Birmingham. And number two, I believe fomepizole is an insanely expensive drug. And I remember coming to blows with the pharmacist who was like, "Are you absolutely sure this is ethylene glycol?" And I was like, "Well, there was an empty bottle found in the house, so..." And we didn't have a positive test for ethylene glycol because there isn't. You've got to send it to Birmingham, but all the biochemical indicators would suggest that this has been done. And is it worth blowing $20,000 on it? It was the question.
Just for the non-healthcare professionals,
Sorry.
So ethylene glycol is antifreeze, and unfortunately it does feature quite often in people, like you say, who've got into a very sticky situation and decided that that's perhaps the nearest thing they can put their hand on to try and end it all. So, and they're very sad. They're very difficult to treat, aren't they? And that's why they end up in intensive care.
So that's interesting though, isn't it? The paracetamol is the most searched for. I think that's what this data's telling us, isn't it? That's the most. So someone who's searching for that is you'd guess someone who's been presented with a patient who has taken too much somewhere in the system. So where's that happening then, and why? I guess that's what I'm curious about.
So just for the record, for the listeners, so the report talks about there were 4,393 deaths due to drug poisoning or misuse, and paracetamol is a big chunk of that. But there are 200 deaths due to tramadol, 2,000 due to opiates. But the paracetamol deaths, actually, for the record, have fallen a lot since about 2004, which is when, of course, you could only buy 32 tablets over the counter. So when you look at the data, actually, there were only 200 paracetamol deaths, I think, and there were 500 plus in 2004 and backwards, and that's all to do with the fact that you can only buy 32 tablets.
I always assumed it was just because people had cottoned on that it wasn't the quick death you would have wanted, and that maybe that's why people were doing it less. I don't know, but it's...
We're hypothesizing.
Yeah, well, I guess the reason for selling it in 32s, the hypothesis was that not just the quantity, but the act of having to pop it out and buy multiple packs from different shops and stuff, just that natural mental break in the process would stop people doing it. Whether that's worked or not, I don't know. But it's definitely a reduction, isn't it?
So, Pete, the medicines that we're talking about, what's your experience of actually using the poison service when you get something that's a real head scratcher and you think, what do we do now? Is that something that features in your or of somebody already contacted poisons when they're in the emergency department?
Usually I only have done it because you normally see the printout from Talkspace. I mean, that was the point I was going to make when I read this report, is I find it hilarious that Talkspace is still a password protected website, because I'm in a number of WhatsApp groups, sort of region wide for job things, and every so often we'll be something like, does anyone know the Talkspace password for this hospital? and I find it mad that it's not as though you log into Talkspace and there's a chatbot telling you what to do. It is essentially the BNF of poison. I don't understand why it needs to be a password protected thing and why it needs... I mean, obviously they get statistical stuff from it, but I find it quite funny that it's not just an open source available non-password, and maybe you guys can enlighten me on that, but I always find that bit quite strange. But yeah, usually we see that somebody else has got the password and logged in and printed off the offending agent by the time we've got there.
We have to remember, Pete, you might be still a little bit too young for this, but before we had Talkspace, man oh man, you had to phone through through to speak to the toxicologist. Now, if you look in this report about the very tiny number of phone calls that make it all the way to the toxicologist, they're tiny, aren't they? So it has, but I agree with you 100% about the password, because it's vital information. And one of the other things that's quite interesting in this report, because of what they're responsible for, it just shows you what happens if something is widely available. So there's this thing called bumps, right, for the listener, which is basically the best available evidence about whether it's safe to take certain types of medicines during pregnancy. And it's written for mum, and it's called Bumps. We recommend it a lot. It had 1.84 million downloads last year. So that just shows you, doesn't it, about information and if you make it accessible to people. So I couldn't agree with you more about it being password protected.
The other one from me, Pete, is number 4 on the list here with unpassed ethylene glycol is bites and stings. And so again, it does take me back to my intensive care days. I was called for 2 snake-related cases during my time. One was for a dog, and I'm going to break confidentiality now, a dog called Snowy, who got bitten on the nose by an adder, and they brought the dog into A&E.
Tintin brought them in, did he?
Brought the dog in. But the other one, more seriously, I suppose, was a very fit, athletic young man who had been poaching deer in one of our local parks, and he had a nasty reaction to the adder bite and was on intensive care for 3 or 4 days. So again, it's what goes around comes around, I suppose. I've
never seen a snake bite in ITU. I mean, we always remember for our undergraduate exams that scorpion bites cause pancreatitis, but nobody sees it. No one's ever seen it happen.
You'll see one within the next month. You watch.
Yeah, it's not just thrown together. It'll happen tomorrow. I'd expect you to tweet about it. So there is a really fascinating bit, again, for the listener. There's a page about the most commonly accessed information on ToxBase about household products, and this is where you want to, as a non-health professional, you want to worry, because it lists the things, and these will be usually, I suspect, I'm going to hypothesize now, these are not people who are intentionally wanting, and this could well include children. So liquid detergent capsules, 11,500 looks online to see what happens if I've swallowed liquid detergent capsule, air freshener liquid, dishwasher tablets, 3,443 in a year, washing up liquid, 2,607. It sounds really, it's almost like public service broadcasting here, but there is a reason why things need to be kept away from children.
I'm looking at the list now. What is Reed diffuser liquid?
So don't tell me I bet you live in a house that has one of these, because ladies love these. So it's that oil, and then they put those reeds in, and then the smell comes up, a bit like Joss sticks, but without the smoke.
Oh God, yeah, I do know that.
So again, Reed diffuser liquid, nearly 5,000.
There we go. I've learned something. So my take on this, what I was thinking about when I was reading it, is what are we learning from this? Is this any different from what it would be 5 years ago? And I guess your job, Pete, is reacting to these things when they happen, at 10 o'clock on a Thursday night or something like that. And I suppose what are we learning, and I suppose from our angle with the drugs about stopping this from happening, because these drugs, I'm looking at them now, analgesics, antidepressants, anti-inflammatories, they're drugs that a lot of them are for chronic conditions, and so you can hypothesize that a lot of these are because they're not all suicides, they're accidental overdose for various reasons or not. And so are we learning anything from it and doing anything about it?
I mean, I suppose to be fair there, it's to have a clinical pharmacologist or a toxicologist come back on with the report, isn't it? And for them to explain, this is the data they hold, they'll be the ones to ask that question, I suppose.
I was thinking about it this afternoon, that I suppose the holy grail of psychiatric drugs is one that, it's the holy grail of any drug really, is one that relieves the symptoms that will not cause harm if they take too many. And I think you're never going to get that. And you're right that there's going to be people who will do it on purpose and those who do it accidentally. And you're going to prove me wrong now.
No. This is where history is important, though. So, Gimo, with your improvement hat on, that one of the safest ways to prevent something from happening is to not have it available. So take coproximol, okay? So if we'd been looking at this report 20 years ago, we had massive numbers of respiratory depressive deaths because of the dextropropoxyphene part of the coproximol. And now there are so many barriers to get hold of it. There's probably only a couple of hundred people left in the UK who take coproximol. Look at our shift towards SSRI antidepressants like sertraline and things. We used to use amitriptyline, dithiapine, horribly cardiac toxic, so they would have featured very heavily. And so if you look at liquid detergent capsules, something needs to happen there, doesn't it? There needs to be a reaction from the people who make them to put them into it. And if you've seen the adverts on the TV, it's hopeless, but it's a bit like when adverts for super strength beer say, please drink responsibly, where the Persil or anybody else just says, make sure you click the top so that your kids can't put their hand in and take the liquid detergent capsule. And that's not good enough, is it?
I did enjoy the sass towards Donald Trump by Talkspace on the social media page of the report, where it says, disinfectant should never be injected, but if you are dealing with this situation, we're here to help. I thought that was beautiful social media right there.
I think we have to end it there. That is just such a great finish.
Let's do this bit, because the other list in there is the pharmacognosy and the Gardener's World stuff. So look, what's not in this list, STC? Number 1, yew. Number 2, lords and ladies. Number 3, cherry laurel. Number 4, foxglove. Holly, daffodils, elderberry, giant hogweed, deadly nightshade, hemlock.
Would it be that when we did the pilot episode of the Oral Apothecary over a year ago, that I insisted that we talk about, as a micro discussion, a atropine-based plant that a person had taken too much of and became quite psychotic and actually ended up chopping off his own manhood? Would that be what you're referring
correct.
to?
And what was it called?
I can't remember. Something trumpet.
Angel's trumpet.
We've got a good laugh out of Pete there, but that's true, Pete. It's absolutely true. Angel's trumpet. We'll send you the link.
That's such a brass eye style drug.
Angel's trumpet doesn't feature in the top 10 as viewed by Talkspace. There we are. Okay, thanks all. A big thank you to Pete for joining us on the Oral Apothecary and for sharing his stories, his desert island drug, his career anthem, and his book for the Oral Apothecary Library. That's it for Series 3. Thanks to all our guests who've joined us over the last few months. Thanks to you, the listener, for your time, support, feedback, and encouragement. We will be back with Series 4 after the Easter break, with or without STC. If you would like to input your ideas and suggestions into the editorial melting pot for Series 4, then we would love to hear from you. You can contact us via Twitter at Oral Apothecary. We're on LinkedIn, and you can email us at oralapothecarypod@gmail.com. Over to Gimmo now for the final ingredient.
Thanks, Pete. That was great. Short one tonight. Since we're talking about poisons, I want to talk about Paracelsus. He was a pioneer. He was a Renaissance physician and a pioneer in several aspects of the medical revolution of the Renaissance, emphasizing the value of observation in combination with received wisdom. He's credited as the father of toxicology. He was a pioneer in that he's one of the first people to think about using inorganic substances such as metals, minerals, and salts as a medicine, as opposed to natural remedies. But as a result, he ended up poisoning a lot of people, which he defended by developing a theory, which I think is still used in toxicology today, that a substance can produce a harmful effect associated with its toxic properties only if it reaches a susceptible biological system within the body in a high enough concentration. So what we know today as the dose. So there you have it. Sola dosis facit venenum. The dose makes the poison.
This was a 3 Apothecaries production. Sound engineer Jimbo Slough. Original music Jamie Brewster. Artwork by David Baker.
Thanks for listening to the Oral Apothecary podcast. Caution, you may spontaneously combust if you take it too literally.
This episode of the Oral Apothecary is sponsored by OneLessPill.com, a medicines optimization consultancy.